Welcome to the Great Basin Smoke Dispersion Briefing for Wednesday, November 25th. This is Gina McGuire. Over the last 7 days, we have had some precipitation across mainly Idaho and Wyoming into far northern Nevada and northern Utah. However, this precipitation has been fairly light and generally below normal for the last 7 days, with the exception of parts of the central Idaho mountains into southeast Idaho into Wyoming. As we look at the current weather, we have a cold area of low pressure situated over the western portion of the Great Basin, and this low will slowly move eastward over the next 2 days across Nevada and Utah before retrograding back to the west. This will provide very cold temperatures across the basin, along with plenty of snowfall, especially over the northern two-thirds of the Great Basin and mainly Idaho, northern Utah, and northern Nevada. It will also provide very gusty winds over parts of southern Nevada and Utah today. Now looking at the ventilation index across the Great Basin, which is a component of the transport winds and the mixing heights, you can see the areas in white signifying the highest ventilation index across the Great Basin are over Nevada and across Utah, where the winds will be the strongest today. Further north, where winds are lighter and also much colder air has settled in along with snowfall, we will likely see lower dispersion across Idaho into northern Nevada and northern Utah. If we look at the individual components, the transport winds on the left, the areas in bright pink and purple are the strongest winds, where we'll see wind gusts above 45 or 50 miles per hour across much of Utah, and these southwest winds will continue throughout today and decrease later tonight. However, across Idaho and into northern Wyoming, we'll also see northeast winds increase today and be fairly strong, especially as we go into the nighttime hours, which will also move across Oregon and into northern Nevada. Mixing heights will be highest where we have the strongest winds out ahead of the area of low pressure, mainly across Utah and into southern Nevada, with much lower mixing heights as you go further north and west. Now we look at the weather pattern as we move into Thursday. This area of low pressure tracks further east across northern Utah, with plenty of moisture in place across Nevada, northern Utah, and Idaho into Wyoming for snowfall expected across the region. Also, very cold temperatures will be associated with this area of low pressure, with most areas for the next several days only seeing highs in the 30s with lows in the low 20s to teens, and even some areas getting near 10 degrees in some of the very colder locations of the Great Basin. Over southern areas, we'll also see highs only in the 50s over southern Nevada with lows in the 30s. So a very cold area of low pressure is settling in across the Great Basin. Also on Thursday, ventilation index will still be quite high across southern and eastern Utah, where the winds will be strongest ahead of this area of low pressure, and also some areas of higher dispersion over parts of Wyoming into Idaho, but much lower ventilation index across Nevada, Utah, and southwest Idaho, where the cold air has settled in and the winds are much lighter. Looking at Thursday, again the winds have decreased across much of Nevada and Utah, however will still be quite gusty over Idaho into western Wyoming. Also, the mixing height with this colder air that has moved in has decreased significantly across most of the Great Basin, with the exception of parts of southeast Utah, which are still ahead of the area of low pressure with still relatively higher mixing heights. As we move into Friday, this area of low pressure actually starts to retrograde west across the western side of the Great Basin, and this will again keep showery conditions across most areas of the Great Basin along with these cold temperatures. Also, as winds decrease with this area of low pressure now expanding across the Great Basin, ventilation index will be quite poor across most areas. Looking at the individual components, we can see why we'll see this low ventilation index. The winds have decreased significantly across most areas of the Great Basin, and the mixing heights have also decreased significantly with this cold air and showery conditions. Looking at the clearing index for Utah, which comes from the National Weather Service, and this indicates generally high clearing index for today, indicating that good dispersion. However, as you can see over the next 2 days, the clearing index decreases significantly as those windy conditions push further east, and we see much colder temperatures and snow showers. Now looking at the overall forecast amount of precipitation over the next 3 days into early Saturday morning, and we can see precipitation in most areas of the Great Basin, most of which will fall as snowfall. Looking at some of the amounts with indications of well over an inch of precipitation possible over parts of Wyoming into southern Idaho and far northern Utah and northern Nevada, that would translate to up to or over a foot of snowfall in some locations. Further south and west we'll see lesser amounts of snowfall, but still many areas will see anywhere from 1 to 5 inches of snowfall. In the Sierra, we saw more significant amounts of precipitation yesterday, but we still will see some lighter additional snowfall accumulations over the next few days. As we look at the extended weather pattern from Saturday through early next week, this area of low pressure is still fairly broad across the Great Basin, keeping snow showers and cold temperatures in place along with lighter winds, and this will keep generally low dispersion across much of the northern and western side of the Great Basin. However, south of this area of low pressure, we may still see some gusty winds over parts of southern Nevada into southern Utah on Saturday, which will temporarily increase the ventilation index. However, as we move into Sunday, we see this area of low pressure start to finally move off to the northeast, keeping the showers and colder temperatures generally across the northern areas of the Great Basin. And also, we still see some improvements to the ventilation index south of this area of low pressure across Utah into parts of northeast Nevada, with still fairly weak dispersion elsewhere. Looking at Monday, this area of low pressure finally moves off to the east with a brief, weak ridge of high pressure that moves into the Great Basin. However, still plenty of moisture now moves into parts of the western half of Nevada, and you can see the ventilation index has decreased significantly with these much lighter winds and a little bit warmer temperatures. As we move into Tuesday, this weak ridge moves to the east with a weak trough now in place over the eastern side of the Great Basin and still plenty of moisture and lighter winds, with again very poor dispersion across the Great Basin expected by early next week. If we look at the overall forecast amount of precipitation from early Saturday morning through early Monday, you can see most of the precipitation is now moved well to the east. We still may see a few light showers over parts of Utah into Wyoming and Idaho, but again we're looking at lesser amounts of precipitation for the rest of the Great Basin. Looking a little bit further ahead to the first week of December, we may see some slight warming conditions across the Great Basin with drier conditions over the eastern side of Utah. However, still precipitation is expected to move into the western half of the Great Basin with generally wet conditions taking us into the early part of December. That concludes our briefing for today. If you have any questions or any suggestions for our webcast, feel free to contact us at the emails on the screen. Thank you for listening.